This is Irish Books, for intelligent discussions of contemporary Irish writing. A neurodivergent young chess champion, his relationship with his brother, and their complicated sex lives are at the heart of Sally Rooney's latest novel, Intermezzo, our book for this episode. Irish Books is hosted by Christopher Murray.
Intermezzo is the fourth novel by the highly acclaimed novelist Sally Rooney, and with me to discuss the book I have no less a colleague than Madeleine Callahan. Maddie, hello.
Hi.
Can you please, at the outset, give us an idea of the scenario of Intermezzo?
The novel follows two brothers, Ivan and Peter Kubek, and they're living in Dublin, and we're focusing in on the weeks after the death of their father in 2022. So we're looking at kind of late summer to Christmas. So we're following these two. Ivan is a 22-year-old former chess prodigy who's trying to get restarted. His career's kind of stagnated during the illness of his father. And he meets and falls in love with Margaret, who's in her mid-30s, an arts program director, and they meet during one of his chess exhibitions at a local arts centre. And he falls deeply in love with her, despite Margaret's concerns about their age difference. We also start following Peter, his elder brother, a 32-year-old lawyer, and he's in a relationship, well, two of them. One with Naomi, a 23-year-old student who tops up her income by selling explicit photographs online in a kind of OnlyFans sort of situation. And she's often going to Peter for financial support. So Peter kind of fears he's been exploited.
I noticed that the age gap is sort of symmetrical across the storylines following the two brothers. So Ivan is 22 and is involved with a woman in her mid-30s, while Peter is in his 30s and is seeing the much younger Naomi. And Rooney's playing on that a bit, isn't she? That one age gap is conventional, but swap the genders around and it's all a bit unusual.
Absolutely. Rooney's really interested in that kind of double standard that every single character seems to internalize as a norm, except for Ivan, who's horrified that this is being overlooked in a particular type of way.
You were mentioning then that Peter is divided in a sense, that he's not just seeing Naomi, is he?
No, Peter's also seeing his ex-girlfriend, who's now a friend, we all know that song, Sylvia, who had been basically in a car accident and has been left in chronic pain, so she can no longer have sex. And as a result of that, Peter feels this kind of major Cartesian division, you could say, between body, which he's trying to put in the Naomi box as, you know, the sexual fire and so on. And then you've got Sylvia he goes to for the much more intellectual side of himself in his own mind.
Early in the novel, Ivan tells us that chess players really only study the opening. They really only study umpteen different ways of setting up the early game, and it creates a state of free play. And I think the novel duplicates that in a sense, because the premises are actually very clever, that you've got the two brothers with that weird symmetry of their storylines and age gaps with their sexual partners. And then the way Peter is divided in a sense between body and soul, between the woman he thinks will give him emotional fulfillment and deep conversation, and the woman he thinks can only give him sexual satisfaction. Although he's probably wrong about those things as it plays out, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He is wrong about both things. And we realise the limits of Peter's perspective, really, when we see Naomi being insisted upon as this potential siren, the sexual exploiter, versus the pure Sylvia, who seems to kind of glide through the world in this incredible intellectual, stream of thought. That doesn't quite work.
Well, for one thing, he has to simplify Naomi a lot, doesn't he? He does her injustice to make her conform to that fantasy. And when Peter realizes that Naomi has had a difficult childhood, for example, it kind of ruins it for him that she's got more baggage than he would like.
Absolutely. So once these women start showing their personhood, we get a problem. And the other thing that I think Rooney's really good on is the idea that, yes, in a chess game, you can have beginnings and you can set up perfectly. There's no such thing as beginnings. Even when Peter's trying to start up with Naomi, he's always got the ghost of Sylvia in his mind. When he's with Sylvia, he's got the ghost of a happy family that he used to exist in his mind. There are no true openings. Everything is kind of fantasy construct land for Rooney, and I think she does the best work with that.
The same evening, still the same, Peter sits alone in Sylvia's kitchen looking down at the screen of his phone. Thoughtless feeling, mind an emptied bowl almost echoing. Photograph of a casserole dish. When the screen begins to darken, he taps to light it again, his only conscious action for a minute or two. No sound in the room except the faint occasional rumble of passing traffic at the front of the building. Toneless hum of the refrigerator. Finally, with the same dull blankness of mind, he texts Naomi that he won't be home for dinner. After many drafts and redrafts, adds, Sylvia's not feeling great, so I'm going to hang around at hers for a bit in case she needs me. Is that okay? Naomi writes back promptly, oh, okay, no worries. Hope she feels better soon. Almost wants to tell her that he would do the same for her. For her, Naomi, if she were ill, which she was that time, and he did. Hang around, that is, in case she needed him. An ear infection, whenever it was, April, May. On the mattress in her old room, holding her small, hot head in his lap, stroking her hair, saying nothing. For you, I would do the same. And isn't that the basic problem? That he would do the same, wants to, and Christ in heaven actually does? When civilization is fundamentally premised on the exclusivity of such willingness. And why is it? Oh, who knows why? That doesn't matter now.
I wonder if we could talk about the way that characters seem not to allow each other a full personhood. And maybe it's typical between siblings, but this seems to be an important aspect of Peter, not just in the way that he imagines Naomi, but also that his conflict with Ivan seems to return to this idea that he doesn't respect Ivan's personhood or Ivan's adulthood.
Yeah, I think a big part of that respect is not being open to the idea that Ivan can or has changed in any way. Peter loves to paint Ivan in this constant, almost like an incel, somebody who had resented even pregnant women for having a seat on public transport.
Well, he does use that word incel, yeah.
Yeah, he does. And he wants to kind of keep him right there in that comprehensible sibling form. I was really taken with Peter saying, oh, well, this is Rooney's reflection on Peter. He only wants what he has always wanted, to be right, to be once and for all proven right. So we get with Peter that Ivan can't change. Ivan's not allowed to be different or better or other.
Yeah, Ivan is static. They're also both bereaved, which is something I don't think we've really touched upon. And it's an important aspect of the novel is that the two brothers have recently lost their father. They seem to understand that this is affecting their behaviour at various points, that Ivan even seems semi-aware that he's been shocked into emotional experience and maybe opened to love for Margaret by the death of his father. Peter has this sense of being destabilised, like everything seems to be falling apart for Peter. So they're reacting seemingly in opposite ways to the loss of their father.
Yes, one of the things that I think Rooney does really well with grief is it's hard to see where their personalities have led them and hard to see where the grief and the fact of bereavement has left them. Both men seem somehow unguided at that point. Ivan, as you say, is broken open and ready to love. And yet Peter seems suddenly that everything he's done, his carefully organised life, is snapping apart. And I think that uncertainty, that sense of grief is, I don't know, non-teleological suddenly. I think that's where Rooney's really good on. They're kind of floating free in the void of grief.
The lack of guidance stood out to me as well. And at one point when the two brothers argue, Peter claims that the family's been dysfunctional. Their parents have separated and the mother doesn't seem like a sympathetic character, to put it shortly, and maybe we can return to her. But in this dysfunctional family, Peter claims that he has been the sort of surrogate father, that he has been the protector of his own father. And there's this recurrent idea of a lack of guidance. And one thing that struck me about this world of this book is how little friendship there is. Now, Margaret does have a close friend in the County Leitrim, her friend Anna, and She suffers a kind of loss in the phase in which she's afraid to tell Anna what's going on in her relationship with Ivan for fear that Anna will disapprove, but later opens up to her. But other characters seem to not have significant friendship, and everything seems to be attached to the idea of sexual partnering. They don't have close family relations either, that they seem to pin everything on their romantic interests.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the horrors of it. I mean, Rooney is reflecting on a world without friendship and intimacy, where, as you say, the best hope you've got of getting out of yourself is through your genitals. And that is a horribly lonely place. But at the same time, you can't but wonder if part of it is that Ivan and Peter, no matter what kind of closeness they might be able to find, they simply can't do it. They're unable to connect properly with each other. They can't properly with their mother. Their father, he seems like a contested site of memory for both of them. You wonder, are we seeing a world in which there's no getting away from yourself?
Naomi is surprised when Peter does emote. She's surprised, for one thing, that he is not fully up to date in terms of things younger people are doing to each other in the bedroom, like spitting in each other's mouths. But she's also surprised by the emotional turn, and she seems surprised by tenderness, and that is deeply saddening as well. That is alien to her, and that speaks terribly for how Rooney sees the state of people, I think, just as much as the way Peter reflects on lonely nights, watching crazy pornography and taking too many anxiety drugs.
I mean, with Naomi, you've got two things, I suppose, at work. It's almost like she's performing being a good-looking 23-year-old girl. And I say girl because we're shown that she's at that strange movement between, I don't know, being the child and being the adult, that Naomi feels like she's got to be this kind of sex pot. She's got to perform in a particular set of ways to capture Peter. But then the kind of alienation from who we really are, and the alienation between yourself and the other, and yourself and your past. Rooney keeps showing us, I suppose, that fracturing, that isolation, and you wonder how far we should give in to that. I was thinking about Sylvia, actually, as a kind of version of that. Sylvia seems in some ways like the successful person in the novel. You know, she's got this fantastic job, which feels like an ethical job that Rooney herself would approve of.
Do you find that entirely credible? Like, there's points at which, like, Sylvia is just this eternal fortitude of patience and tolerance and wisdom, and it's almost a relief when she succumbs a bit to sexual urges, because she has, I think, almost become too perfect as the intellectual being at certain points of the novel.
Yeah, I was so relieved. I almost wanted Sylvia to be found with a pot noodle and a bag of pornography, because it was so alien to life, this kind of floating free of the demands of the body. And on some level, you get that Rooney's showing that this is absolutely a role that Sylvia can succeed at. But it didn't feel real, but I don't know that I was supposed to find her quite real. Sylvia was always somehow just out of view to me.
No, she's another performative character. In that you said that Naomi performs, and I remember a word that stands out because it reminded me of Stephen visiting prostitutes in Joyce's Portrait of the Artist, like the word doll, and that the word is used in relation to the way Naomi expects to be positioned and to make herself available for Peter's pleasure, and that's a kind of performance of a submissive role. But Sylvia, in her way, is enacting this part of the professor, isn't she?
I kind of feel that Sylvia is the least personed of everybody in the novel in that way. The perfection makes her alien, doesn't it? It's like Milton's God on some level before he starts shouting.
I suppose she's also then the kind of compensatory, ironically, kind of maternal figure. Ironic because, of course, she can't have children, and this is undoubtedly the reason why she has broken up with Peter, this realization that they will not be able to have a married life in which she has sex with him and gives him children. But ironically then, in this idealized feminine presence she has, she's like the maternal
Yes.
figure towards Ivan.
Yeah, it feels that, in a sense, Sylvia's called upon to counsel and to understand. Reminds me of that Mother Mary that I think all good Catholics and bad Catholics grew up with. And you kind of wonder how Sylvia is supposed to cope with herself, how Sylvia is supposed to be. Because that moment, as you said, when she gives into an idea of, I think, an idea that she can possess Peter fully and they can be together in that moment.
Briefly.
Very briefly. And you wonder how far Peter's exploited her, of course. But yeah, Sylvia seems to be given this kind of mother role, as you say, ironically.
So how does it all add up? I mean, what does Rooney want to say? What does she want us to think about? Does she want us to think about our values in relation to, say, how we view age gaps in couples? I think there's much more to it than that. I mean, what do you think the novel is fundamentally trying to do?
I think she's in the cerebral tradition, honestly. I mean, I was immediately taken by the fact that she chooses Ivan as the name in this novel. Straight away, I thought, well, there's Karamazov. And I saw that she herself mentions that as a major impetus to her writing. And I thought the same about Peter, even the idea of the way that they behave with women. I think this is an intellectual novel about how to live now in very many ways. And I think that journey to the kernel of self, I think that's what she wants us to put pressure on. I don't feel a sense of being awakened on any level. I think she wants us to attend, I suppose. And it is a Dublin novel as well.
You'd say conspicuously so. I mean, often people will talk about Rooney as a millennial in a very broad sense, as though she wasn't also Irish.
I think you're right about that. I think that's probably, apologies, non-Irish readership that don't understand some of the things that she's up to. So it's easier to kind of deracinate her and make her just a millennial. I see this novel as really interested in Ireland, really interested in the kind of post-boom period and where Ireland's going now.
It all seems pretty bleak. I mean, I think to follow both of those points, one about who we are now and where Ireland is going. I mean, as far as this novel illuminates those trajectories, it doesn't seem to be going towards happy places.
But that's also because Rooney doesn't like certain things about modern Ireland, and I think they're debatable. I keep talking about Darren.
Is Darren Christine's child by her second marriage, or is he a stepson to Christine? I think stepson.
Yeah, I think he's a stepson. But Darren sort of represents a different type of where Ireland's going. And I remember this quotation made me laugh. He happens to know that Darren lives at home and works for a corporate law firm, earning a massive salary and contributing zero, literally nothing at all to human civilization. That couldn't but make me laugh a great deal. Just the kind of antithesis, I suppose, of what Rooney believes in. This idea of Darren, the consumer, the ultimate consumer, working in the wrong type of law, earning the wrong kind of salary, and doing nothing but reading, I don't know, the computer games, kind of sleeves rather than novels on the state of being.
She likes these pot shots at the areas of Dublin society that displease her. Do you remember the occasion for Ivan encountering Darren? Because this interests me a lot.
The dog.
The dog. And I think the dog is important as this kind of emblem of responsibility. And the scenario is that the dog belonged to Ivan and Peter's father, and that they need to find a place for the dog after the father dies. And Ivan can't take the dog into his flat, and Christine seems to hate it. I just want to read a little bit about when Ivan is trying to find a home for the dog. That night, Ivan is in the kitchen of his flat, eating a bowl of instant noodles and scrolling through a page of search results matching the query, "Need a temporary home for my dog, Ireland." Once again, however, after 5 or 6 attempts using different keywords, the results consist of links like "How to foster a dog" and "Dogs available for fostering now." To take a dog out of the fostering system into one's home appears to be very simple, and yet Ivan cannot find a single website explaining how to put a dog into that same system. No process obviously can consist exclusively of output without any corresponding input. The dogs are coming from somewhere, but how to make his own dog one of them, Ivan still has no idea. There's much I love about that passage. One element of it is just how the internet never gives you what you ask for. And the other is just how the dog is this symbol of responsibility in the novel and the evasion of responsibility. Christine despises the dog and the very idea of the dog. Peter won't do anything for it either. And it's only poor Ivan, really, who's left with any sense of responsibility towards Alexei, the adorable dog.
Absolutely. Ivan wants to do the right thing. He doesn't want to be right. He wants to do what is right, which I think is a fine line to draw, but I think an important one with Ivan and Peter. Christine's attitude to the dog, as you say, is horrifying. She just sees what my dad would call a dog, a shit machine, that there's nothing good about taking care of this animal. And I think what kills you is Ivan just needs a break for a few weeks to sort things out, and that seems impossible. And I think that's one of the senses I think that many of us that have been bereaved remember, that sense of just needing just a bit of help for a moment and how difficult that can be to come by. And like you say, we've got responsibility, but also the simplicity of the dog. If you think about Ivan, Margaret, Peter, Naomi, Sylvia, everybody in that novel is complicated. The dog is not complicated. The dog just needs to be looked after and loved.
The dog is this kind of straightforward question of need, which no one in the novel except for Ivan is willing to answer.
Nobody wants to take responsibility. And maybe that's the problem, that everybody in the novel is kind of alone with their petty griefs and their own difficulty, and nobody wants to do more than that.
You mentioned the Irishness of the novel, and one way in which it is conspicuously in an Irish literary tradition is the amount of attention to the interiority of the characters. And like, relative to its length, like, not all that much happens, but there's this intense amount of agonizing and wrangling over everything. And there's a huge amount of self-judgment and the inner voice.
Oh, hugely. I don't know, this to me is where the Irish novel looks a lot like the Russian one as well. That interesting.
Miserable.
Yeah, but not, it's more that absolute intensity of anatomizing the self, that need to get hold of it. And, we've all read enough meditations on the Irish literary tradition. Is this from the Catholic faith, that need to kind of think through one's sins, to kind of, suffer internally for everything? But I'd ask why that's not a feature of the Spanish novel to the same degree, if that's the case. There seems to be something specific there. Rooney, I think, is uniting the Russian tradition with the Irish tradition to get something large out of it, which is to combine types of attention to the question of the self in the world.
I'll have to take your word for it as to what is missing from the Spanish novel. But certainly, yeah, that the Irish and Russian literary traditions as bedfellows in misery is a fairly long-standing, enduring marriage.
Mm-hmm. But I was thinking, if I was going to make that statement, what does that mean? What's the difference then between Russian and Irish? In this novel, I keep thinking that Brothers Karamazov, which Rooney does name as a major influence on the novel, we see that Dostoevsky does set pieces, as I think of them, where he thinks through stuff like the problem of evil in a whole chapter that's just intellectual pyrotechnics. Rooney won't do that. Rooney makes everything happen in context, in a human context. These meditations we see Peter having, they're when he's rushing back from a tryst with Naomi, for example, when he's thinking about his fights with Ivan, for example. There's something much more connectedly human about the way in which it works in a Rooney novel, or maybe in an Irish novel as a whole. What I do want to know, though, Chris, from you is, I keep thinking about that Stephen Spender line, I long to forgive them, but they never smiled. Are Rooney's characters ever smiling at themselves or laughing? Joyce's characters are aware, right? Leopold Bloom's sort of fixed smile as he deals with his own issues, problems, and idiosyncrasies. Daedalus's snarl of amusement at his own depravity sometimes. Are we seeing a smile or a laugh in a Rooney novel?
No, there aren't many laughs in it, and there's none of what we'd call the kind of Beckettian sense of the tragic shambles of human existence. It's all very serious and damning, isn't it? And the characters seem to lack that ability to extract humor in moments of despair, which is unfortunate because often humor is the moment at which the character can step back from despair in Irish literature.
That's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about the scene when they go to Kildare finally, and Ivan goes there, and Naomi's waiting there. And I was thinking, if I was reading a Joyce novel, or Kevin Power, if we want to take something more contemporary, that would be the moment for a laugh, wouldn't it? It would be the moment for something farcical to come and hit you between the eyes. But we don't get that.
Yeah, it's not. It's just extremely awkward. It's just, oh, who are you? Mm-hmm. It's all played very, very deadpan.
Yeah. And I wonder, is this Rooney choosing to extract the humour so that we're able to stay on that emotional trajectory, or is this a missed opportunity in the novel?
I suppose a reason not to go down the comic route is that Rooney is deliberately, in Ivan, creating a character who is neurodivergent. And it might be quite deliberate that she shies away from the tried and trusted comic route and that she wants to fulfill that character. That's an aspect of Ivan I don't think we've touched on yet.
I guess the way Ivan sees the world, that would be a horrible, almost dissolving moment to try and turn it into a more broad comedy. Ivan simply doesn't see the world that way. The passage that you read out with the dog, for example, there should be, the laughter is from us, isn't it? Where we recognise.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what the internet does. But you can't imagine Ivan laughing as he thinks about that. So yeah, as you say, she's staying true to the characters in this way.
That's right. So resisting comedy.
Resisting. But I was thinking about other bits that could be funny. You alluded to this earlier, this quotation from Peter, where he says to Naomi, look, it's different for your generation. You're all going around getting strangled and spitting in each other's mouths or whatever. We're normal. And that could have been funny. But you don't feel Peter smiling even there. So I suppose I keep wondering, why is nothing funny?
Nothing is funny because nothing is fun. And another phrase that stood out to me was the hard-won sexual freedoms of the post-Catholic era or whatever. And maybe Peter looks at someone like Naomi and thinks, why aren't you happy? You should be happy.
I agree. Maybe there is that sense of looking at a younger generation of feeling that they're wasting it. But then I do think you're understating there's a po-faced quality. I can't get over this quotation. We need an erotics of environmentalism. And I thought, who? Who needs an erotics of environmentalism?
Can you remind me, like, at which point in the novel or which character is calling for, quote, an erotics of environmentalism?
Oh, it's Sylvia, of course.
And why is she saying it?
In context, she's talking about, and I shall read this to you, aesthetic nullity of contemporary political movements in general, related to or just coterminous with the almost instantaneous corporate capture of emergent visual styles. Everything beautiful, immediately recycled as advertising, sense that nothing can mean anything anymore aesthetically. The freedom of that or not. The necessity of an ecological aesthetics or not. We need an erotics of environmentalism, stupidly making each other laugh.
I see.
So what we get there is we're told that they're making each other laugh stupidly, giddily, right?
Yeah.
And yet we're not laughing as readers. I feel that I've entered the student common room of a very good university. But I would also say that I can't quite buy what I'm being sold here, to borrow the advertising parlance. That kind of sense that nothing can mean anything anymore aesthetically, the freedom of that or not. These feel like prompts for essay questions. These don't feel deeply felt, nor do they feel that there's a lightness about them at all, even though I'm supposed to understand that this is a light-hearted intellectual byplay between the characters. Basically, bored, aren't we?
Is this ennui as a human condition emerging in the novel, or are you saying there's just too much cleverness in the novel?
I do like cleverness, don't get me wrong. But I think that there can be a sense of amused lightness that I think, or amusingness that someone like Joyce would be able to play with. There could be a kind of lightning quick vein of wit that would sprinkle Joyce doing something like that. But I don't think I'm seeing that here in Rooney. It feels heavy, even though I'm told it's light.
So is that to say you see it as underdeveloped?
Yes, I think that if you're going to play intellectual games, commit to those games, make them fun or make them more demanding intellectually. So basically choose to be Dostoevsky and to go deeper, or choose to be Joycean and witticism central in that way. I don't think here I'm seeing enough. I'm seeing a very bright thinker, but I'm not seeing one that's necessarily believes in her own wizardry here.
I guess it's legitimate for Rooney simply not to be a comic writer. But I've the same problem with that scene you just read in that we're being told, like it's being signaled for us that this is a moment of humor because these clever characters are laughing at it. But we don't feel it on the pulses, that it's kind of reported emotion rather than something that emerges. I suppose I just stand by the point that Rooney isn't a comic writer. And at moments, like when we talked about Ivan meeting Naomi for the first time, at moments I admire it because there's a comic scene waiting to happen when these characters unexpectedly bump into each other. And Rooney perhaps pulls away from cliche by not allowing that to unfold. And she stays true to the character of Ivan by insisting on viewing it through his unique sense of existence.
I think you're right. Not every writer has to be a comic writer. I don't go to P.G. Wodehouse for a thoroughgoing understanding of tragic kind of thought. So why should I go to Rooney to be amused? But I do think that if I'm being told that these characters are stupidly laughing, I want to find something funny. And also, I suppose I'm responding to a lot of the reviews of the novel where The Guardian, for example, refers to it as perfect. And I thought, no, I don't think what Rooney is doing, and I don't think it's what she'd want us to respond to in this way also. I think there is a missing part of all of these characters. Peter, who has to be right. Sylvia, who can't possibly decide that she will be in a relationship with Peter despite his love for her because she can't be perfect. Naomi, trying to peddle bits of herself that are consumable. Everybody's got something missing. And I think Rooney, what's missing from this novel is that capacity to laugh. And I think for a novel that's trying to show me human life so nearly, so intensely, I think I could have at least had one cheap laugh that's not at the expense of Darren. And I think we should talk about that. We haven't talked about the fact this feels like a moral novel. Like neither of us have been able to take a germ of morality out of it, a lesson, as it were. But I feel that this is an intensely moral piece of writing. What do you think?
I think we touched on morality in the sense that we begin with that premise of the two brothers with the age gaps in their relationships. And I wondered, like, is Rooney really wagging her finger at us here? Like, is she really saying, how can one brother judge his younger brother's relationship when it simply duplicates his own in ways that he doesn't consider conventional? So early on, there's a fairly simplistic kind of moral.
The disruption of that, which you pointed out earlier, I think is true. Like, I want to say, yes, Rooney's right. Why do we treat these age gap relationships differently? But it's clear that every character in the novel is treating it very differently.
Another moral topic in the novel that occurred to me was the distracting knowledge in my mind as I was reading about Peter and Sylvia and coming to know their backstory, that in both Catholic and Protestant traditions, it was normal for couples to receive counseling prior to marriage. And a fairly conventional question in those sessions would be for each member of the couple to be asked, what would you do if this person suffered a debilitating illness or accident, because you would be expected to look after this person for the rest of your life? And it's kind of background information that we're being asked to evaluate Peter and Sylvia's respective willingness to sever their relationship.
I think you're right. Yeah. I kept thinking that how much more information I'd have liked on that. And Rooney was so good at hiding that from me and letting me piece that together with fragments. One thing I kept thinking is that unlike the standard problem, which is that, the idea of the male partner running away once the female partner was sort of injured, it seemed that Sylvia had very much been the one to get rid of Peter. And I kept thinking about that question because you're right, that was a big part of the marriage counselling, prior to marriage. But also the question is, what do you do if you are the wounded party? Are you able to be cared for by somebody else? I mean, that's a much lesser explored side of the question, isn't it? And yet what we see here is Sylvia basically says, go forth and find somebody else. There's no future with me.
She won't let him go. She does reveal that she has some pride and that she does have some vanity as well, and that there are both selfish and unselfish reasons for the nature of her continued relationship with Peter, and that she pushes him away and pulls him back.
Oh, absolutely. I think that made her very human. But I found it really interesting that Peter didn't seem to put any pressure upon Sylvia's decision that often. Like he seemed far less embittered about that. And there was something that worried me about Sylvia's own attitude to potential rivals, I suppose, that she seemed to think that he would go and get sex somewhere else and they could maintain their high platonic relationship where they were these evenly matched intellectual sparring partners. And then it would almost be that there'd be a girl in the corner capable of turning whatever trick it took to keep Peter happy. And that felt really uncomfortable to me. So even if Sylvia thinks that Peter should be able to find pleasure in a kind of throuple, or, they are the primary partners and somebody else can be brought in to provide the sex for Peter, Peter himself doesn't seem to want that, does he?
Well, that might lead us back to the moral question. Are we being asked to extract a kind of morality from that in this disturbing 21st century world in which we leave these atomistic or isolated existences and we can be alienated from our own families and not have close friends and things like that, that in turn it's okay to construct these new kinds of communities, if you want to call them that?
I don't know. I think she's better than that in a sense. Not that I don't mean that as a judgment to anyone's sexual practices. What I mean is she sees the complexity and the difficulty of that yes, even if you do that, how does she put it? The demands of other people do not dissolve. They only multiply, more and more complex, more difficult. So basically, the more people are added in, there are more people involved, more complexity, more backstories, more problems that effectively the idea, as you mentioned, the opening is never opening. The start is never a start. We're always in these enmeshed webs of human existence. I guess what she's saying is this atomistic thing isn't working, but what does offer us hope? What can we do? And I don't think she tells us. I think she asks us to consider it, but she won't tell us the answers.
Okay. Not like, say, Michel Houellebecq's Atomized, which has this, weirdly dystopian post-relationship vision.
No, exactly. None of that. So we have to, I guess she's saying that everything has a price. Everything. Sally Rooney novels are good at counting that and showing us that we choose different types of suffering, I suppose. That's maybe what she tells us. There won't be a life without suffering, but some types of suffering are more worthy than others. We know she respects Ivan more than Darren. Ivan with his instant noodles and Ivan with his desperate efforts to kind of get back into the chess ranking, much more than she respects Darren for all his kind of success financially.
There are caricatures in this novel. I think that Darren is one, and I think that Christine is another. Why, as a matter of interest, why did The Guardian think it was perfect?
The Guardian basically found that it nailed down the major issues of the day perfectly well, and they considered that what Rooney does is alight this kind of question of how we live now in a what they call a perfect way.
Okay.
I was concerned that the average people, like Christine, is so average. Even the thing she says, oh, I'll come back for Christmas if you want. We all recognise that kind of person, don't we?
Yeah.
They make you aware that anything you need from them, you must ask for, you must request. Again, they let you know your cost, just as she is with the dog. Anything that's difficult, she won't do. And Darren, the irritating Darren, there's a sense, though, that we've not had any chance for Darren to speak for himself. Maybe he is more complicated. But it's a Sally Rooney novel. He's not allowed to have complications. He's just a money-making machine, a brand-consuming drone who never in his life has thought through the difference between Dostoevsky and Joyce. And we know that for all the broken horror of these characters, any character in a Rooney novel, if you have thought about the difference between Dostoevsky and Joyce, you're on a different level. I think she favours the bright. She favours the intelligent.
There's a kind of cultural elitism, but I think it's also fairly common in contemporary Irish literary fiction to have these potshots at the bankers, and you shall know them by their Jaguars and their bottles of Johnny Walker Blue or whatever it is, and that it's quite easy to snipe at the caricatures of the Celtic Tiger years or the Celtic Phoenix years as they are now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like these people want all the wrong things. But right there, that sense that there is an elite, and the elite, the real elite, are the people who create beautiful things, who appreciate beautiful things. I feel that as a reader, we're being converted into one of those people that is one of those few alone in modern times. We cuddle our copies of Rooney to our chest to say that we are on the right side of the culture, right?
Do we?
Yes, I would say so. Every time a Rooney novel comes out, that's going to be a kind of pass. So I do think there is a sense of yes, this is the correct way that we as a culture should behave. And that's much more true in Irish culture than the British culture, because British culture has always and ever been proud of its own ignorance in certain ways, right?
So how does, say, the high culture elements of Rooney's writing correspond to her success? Like I can't imagine that many of her fans are saying, "Oh, this one's named after a quotation from Schiller. I'll have a bit of that." Like is this something which the general readership cares about, or is grateful to learn about in the course of a Rooney novel?
Rooney's very good at layering her novels, and you can read them on so many different planes. And I think you could read this novel as simply an exploration of a relationship between two brothers and their love affairs, which is absolutely legitimate. That's an absolutely fine way to read it. Or you can be looking for how she interacts with Russian literature. She's got that ability to make her reader feel more intelligent for the fact of having read or even owned a Sally Rooney novel. That is a happy gift, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, what's most important? If we look beyond the relationship between two bereaved brothers and the various women with whom they are sleeping at various times and the exact things they get up to in those relationships and whether or not they spit in people's mouths, it's more importantly about modern Ireland, the directionlessness, the isolation, the incoherence.
Yeah, I think there's a sense of seeking a theme. I think there's a question over the modern Irish novel about what are we now? A really serious question. We are far away from the years of Ireland as being kind of, dominated by the church. We are far away from certain archetypes of Irishness. Ireland is one of the most modern and economically successful countries. It's changing in ways that are quite incredible. And I think novelists are thinking, where now? What are we? What is distinctively Irish now?
Can you answer that then as to who does it especially well? Rooney's asking, what are we now? Who else is doing it? Because like a lot of writers I admire, say, for example, Anne Enright's The Green Road is an excellent novel with the benefit of hindsight about the excesses of the Celtic Tiger years. Whereas The Wren is perhaps, like this novel we're talking about now, concerned with where are we now? And I don't think The Wren can answer it. Do you know a novel that answers that question, where are we now, or which gives it a kind of coherent shape? or which illuminates it in a way that makes you aware of something of which you weren't aware before? And if not, what's the point? I mean, what's the point in simply representing our own age to us? What's the point in simply showing us that modern Ireland is an alienating place?
That's a really good question. I mean, I suppose one of the major problems is I think we always have to see our own age reflected back to us. I don't think there is a novel of any greatness that doesn't give that to us. Even if they're writing historically, we're always seeing our own faces. I think I'd say one of the novels that surprised me was the Kevin Power White City. I thought that was a really interesting exploration of what to understand of Ireland now Ireland has changed so fundamentally. And it's a brutal, brilliant novel in so many ways, where it thinks about what happens next. Because in a way, you could argue that White City lets Darren narrate it. So I think that's a really good one. I think Paul Murray's trying to do that. I was thinking about The Bee Sting, where he's trying to deal with the father, what's he called, Morris Barnes, when Morris Barnes keeps telling us about not bad for a guy from Piggery Lane, and yet is still obsessed with looking like a gent of the manor and showing off that kind of that unease with modern Ireland. And also, I mean, Chris, I think there's so many good things in that difficult relationship between the city and the country in Ireland. We know this. So many novels talk about Dublin and assume that makes them an Irish novel. But is that actually a Dublin novel? I feel like that. I'm from a bit of England that doesn't get written about, near Blackpool. Who is writing good novels about that? Not many people. And I'm supposed to read a novel set in London amongst the virgin olive oil drinking people who, sent their children to Montessori nurseries rather than just tie them to the back of a chair. And I'm supposed to understand that as to be a reflection on Englishness? Not really. So I wonder if we're seeing a sort of gulf been opened up between what is an Irish novel versus what is a Dublin novel.
So would you say the scope of this novel gives us a broader vision of Ireland truly, or is everything really bound to Dublin as the metropolitan centre?
I feel like it was bound to Dublin. I feel that the scenes are set in Leitrim, in Kildare. We're always aware of Dublin as in relation to those places. So in Leitrim, the amazing cultural centre's doing great work. But when Ivan arrives, Margaret is so conscious of hiding him from the view of everyone else. It's like the panopticon, right? In small town life in Ireland, they may be observed, and that is a dangerous, dangerous thing.
That sense of scrutiny in rural Ireland, like in Leitrim, is very authentic as well. And it's obviously, it's a way of playing the hits of Irish literature. I was talking about it recently in Colm Tóibín's Brooklyn and the sequel Long Island, and any other number of things as well. This uncomfortable sense of surveillance, even in a supposedly post-Catholic world, that there's this monitoring of people and their behavior. Anyway, so was there anything you wanted to talk about before we wrapped up?
I suppose just the sense that what is missing from this is what you might see in other novelists, sort of a drive to correct maybe, or a drive to recalibrate. I wonder if somebody in Kildare is reading this novel and seeing this as a call to action, or are we speaking basically like a Guardian editorial to people who already agree with you, who already agree that there are problems with atomization, who already get that? And I keep thinking, I'd have liked to understand the female characters more. I mean, on a basic female level, is Peter really worth all this? Really? Why do these women care so much about Peter Kubek? And Ivan, as I say, this young man who's basically this sweet incel virgin, meets Margaret and has his sexual awakening and his love awakening. And as you said, she seems almost nostalgic for the relationship before it's ended. I keep wondering, why are these women doing it? Why are these women taking on this nurturing, mothering role endlessly with these men? And I don't think I have an answer to that. Just that it's what women do. Rooney focuses on two men, and that's great. absolutely, as a novelist, you've got to make those decisions, but I did not find enough there in the character, for example, of Peter, who I preferred reading about than Ivan in many ways.
I didn't find Peter credible. And I'm not going to say the same thing about Ivan, because I had a sort of opposite experience. I enjoyed reading about Ivan a bit more because of his unique worldview. And I sort of took it on board. Okay, we see Ivan as a young man with a unique cognitive experience. Peter, I didn't find credible. And there's a shade of Darren to Peter, maybe. And just Peter, like I said, the novel gives intense attention to interiority and these kind of James Joyce type inner monologues in which characters contradict themselves as we witness long chains of thought unfolding. I just didn't find Peter credibly drawn. And I'm thinking, for one thing, of the scene in which Ivan and Peter meet for dinner in the restaurant and the way they talk about caring for each other and things like that. And I just thought, this is not how young men speak to each other. And it was interesting for me to hear you say something similar about the female characters.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we see is how we're aware of the fiction of the imagining, aren't we? We're aware that, as you say, young men do not sit down and kind of evaluate their relationship with one another in that way. Even post-bereavement, I think people would at best need 10 drinks before they tried that kind of thing. But yeah, I kept thinking, like, I'm not given enough for why this exists and what specifically they're getting out of it. I couldn't see what Sylvia was doing. I couldn't see the whys. I couldn't see Naomi makes the point that she doesn't really ask Peter for much money. And actually, she doesn't require these things. And yet, as you said, like a doll, she puts herself in the way of his desire. What is in it for her? I mean, I enjoy this novel. I think what I want is more pressure upon this. If life is about these thickening connections, these cobwebs of relationality, why are they there in the first place? Some of them are habit, right? Like sibling relationships, or just these are the roles we have. But when we move into the romantic, I'm not sure that's so simply done. I think we need something more key. I think that's why Ivan and Margaret felt strangely more believable than Naomi and Peter.
Is that because Margaret has so much crisis? Not just the crisis of her ex-husband turning up to confront her at her office and things like that, but also the potential crisis becoming an actual one of the community finding out about Ivan.
Absolutely. And also, it felt like Margaret was existing without plot and without meaning, and Ivan fills that hole of meaning and lack. And I think she can be tender to him in the way she wishes her mother would be tender with her. I found that relationship heartbreaking, watching her try and find a piece of kitchen equipment that would delight her mother and make her siblings look worse, because we want to be loved. And that just simple fact of Margaret trying to be loved. And Ivan felt so simple in her life in a good way that he would provide that love.
He's like her Alexei the dog.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, we're aware of a crush to be had, but that felt like simple and natural and inevitable. A love affair that may well not work, but no less sweet for that.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you, Chris.
Irish Books is hosted by Christopher Murray and produced by Martin Franklin for East Coast Studio, with support from the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Embassy of Ireland, Australia, and Monash University.